On this Sega Talk, we go hands-on with Sega's many controllers. We take a look at the base controller for each major console, pointing out the weirdest and most essential controllers, and share our personal preference. Stick around until the end because we will crown best Sega controller of all time on Sega Talk.
Sega Bits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome to episode number 151 of Sega Talk. I am 6-Button Barry, and with me is 2-Button George.
Hi everyone. Is that like, is more buttons better?
Mm-hmm. It's
All
a
right.
fact. It's a proven fact. So this episode is a Patreon pick.
Ooh.
Our picker is Zachary Ross, and
Nice.
He did not share any memories as of yet, but lucky for him, this is going to be a two-parter.
Nice.
Just because
So
we
much.
are going to be talking. We're going to be talking about so much. Well, what he initially wanted to talk about was Sega controllers and accessories, and so I started the notes, and I was like, I'm going to do notes for all of just the controllers, that the base controller that like you get in the box, and they might do one or two revisions. And I hit 7 pages of notes, and I was like, I am not talking about fishing rods or keyboards or maracas.
So many, right?
Yeah. So this one's going to be those. Next episode's going to be, or in 2 episodes from now, it's going to be that. But yeah. So I'll do the Patreon plug too. I'm feeling good today, George. So you don't have to stress about all those. You can just dance in the background while I talk about the Patreon. So if you check us out, patreon.com/SegaBits. You can support us. We have tiers as low as $1, high as, I guess, however much you want to give us. But we do have a picker tier, and we do have 3 pickers who are doing a fantastic job telling us what to cover on the show. We have Michael S., Daniel Andres, and Zachary Ross. They all have like S's in their last name. I'll call them S Squad, maybe.
I like it.
Daniel, little peek behind the curtain, we have a Google Doc where they put like their picks. I think he's picked for like the next 2 years.
Oh, nice.
Which is like, okay, well, why don't you just pay for the next 2 years right now? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, we are really we're kind of booked through January actually, which is kind of exciting. We have a nice mix of topics coming up, and on this episode, like I said, it's going to be a little unique because we are basically going through Sega console by console, talking about the base controller for each console. And as mentioned at the top of the show, we will crown our agreed-upon favorite. And you might be having a little deja vu. There is an episode back in the 80s where we talked about the Dreamcast controller and the VMU. And so if you want that one, go back and we really get deep into it.
It's right here on top. See that link? Click it, and you can go watch that one after you finished watching this one, of course.
Exactly. So thankfully that frees us up from not talking about the VMU too much, if at all. But I did think it would be interesting to go through all the consoles and kind of see the progression and maybe regressions, some people might say, in the various elements of the Sega controllers or control pads or whatever they want to call them. Now, if you grew up in the West, you probably would think that the Master System was the first console we're going to start with. However, Sega had a console that released before the Master System called the SG-1000, and we have yet to actually cover that console itself on a Sega Talk episode.
Very nostalgic memories of that console.
Yeah. I feel like it's worth talking about, though.
Yeah.
We could probably knock out a bunch of games that will never get their own episode, just because it's, those games, they're like Atari level deep. There isn't too much to say.
It's a console that released only in Japan, so think about the quality of games. And Atari already kind of has really bad games to go back to. Sometimes you're like, oof.
Right.
Yeah.
So the SG-1000, which was called, I guess it means Sega Game 1000, was known in New Zealand as the Sega 1000. So they actually got it over there. They got great comedies and SG-1000. That's what they get. And
what's your opinion on the name, like SG-1000 and SG-3 SC and all these other names they had back then?
I mean, what's interesting about this is that it was their entry into the console market, and they do a lot of things that they kind of stopped doing after this. They really liked doing that numbering where it was like the SC-3000, the SG-1000, and I think that fit with a lot of other products at the time. But I feel like Atari was doing it to death, Sega started doing it, and like after a while it's like, what are these, computers or like fun little machines? Like, do you give them like a cool name? Do you give them letters and numbers, or like what direction are you going to take this? And obviously the SG-1000 was not a direction they really went with it. It was Sega's first dedicated gaming system aimed at home consumers. It was actually a cost-reduced counterpart to the SC-3000 computer, which released on the same day on July 15th, 1983. So think of that. It's like, kind of the equivalent of now where we get the digital and disc version of the PlayStation or Xbox. It's like the Series S or the Series X. So the SG-1000 was very much like the Series S of the two. It was only sold in select markets in Asia and Oceania.
What's that? That sounds like a place that like Aquaman lives.
Well, I was going to say that's where yeah. I don't know if you knew this, but Aquaman's kingdom like existed up till the 80s.
So back then they used to have SGs with one. Okay.
He grew up on an SG.
Makes sense.
2 million units were sold worldwide. While the console fared better than many of its rivals, its main market in Japan would be dominated by the Famicom. It was successful enough, however, to convince Sega that they could continue with video games in the home, which is something that, continues until the 90s or 2000s.
2002.
Yeah. Sega would refine the design of its release with the SG-1002 the following year, and would release the first substantial upgrade, the Mark III, released worldwide as the Sega Master System in 1985. So let's take a look at that first controller that Sega released. This little thing.
It has so much function. it could play Sonic the Hedgehog on it, though.
Mm-hmm. So looking at these now, like, this is back in the day when a controller looked like a remote control. Like, it was long, you held it, like, upright.
It looks like a remote control with... So if you're listening to an audio, it's a joystick that sticks up, like an arcade stick. It has a Sega sticker. It's all gray and looks like a remote control with a red button on the side that you click. Kind of more like a walkie-talkie button than an actual gameplay button.
It does look like a walkie-talkie. Yeah, so it was initially hardwired to the unit so it could not be removed. Oof, and then a second controller could be connected through a DE9 port on the right-hand side of the machine. So you would have the hardwired one for one player and then optional player 2, one that could connect to the side.
It's a 9-pin, so does that mean it works on the Sega Genesis?
Yes. In fact... these were actually advertised as being able to work on other consoles, which is interesting.
Atari also uses it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you could use this on an Atari. And Sega later released an adapter cable known as the JC100. They love those little naming system.
Yeah.
That allowed for the use of standard detachable controllers and replaced the hardwired joystick. So they got rid of that hardwired one, which is great, because imagine your controller breaks but it's connected to your console. It's kind of like you can't cut the cord. I guess you could if you were like savvy with electronics.
Seems like a big pain.
You noted that orange button there. There's actually another one on the other side. So the controller in total has a joystick and 2 independent buttons on the sides of the unit. And interestingly, it was, as you mentioned, advertised as being compatible with non-Sega systems. The controller had many problems. The joystick was unresponsive. The wire leading to the console was incredibly short. And it had a very cheap build quality. The closest comparison would be like a ColecoVision controller. And those aren't, I don't think, very much beloved. Have you played
a ColecoVision?
I played Intellivision and 2600 and 800, but I have not played a ColecoVision, but their controllers do not look that great.
Technically, this is Sega's first controller ever and their first attempt at one. What's your opinion on the design? As you know, the colors they chose, like, does it kind of reflect on the direction they would head after this?
I mean, I think what's interesting about it is there are elements that did get carried over to the next console, but it's very light. Like the DE9 port, you know, you have that 9-pin adapter. And the the idea of having an arcade stick there is something they didn't really move away from. Like they kept that up for the next few iterations, but everything else just was like, they did not carry on with it. However, it very much does have like an aesthetic that Sega was like all about. Yeah, like they owned that sort of aesthetic, and we're not looking at the console, but if you want to look it up in your own time and compare it, it's something.
I will say that it's and we might do an episode on it, so you'll probably hear us talk about it soon. The gray on this reminds me a lot of the Sega Saturn gray controllers. They have a gray and a white one. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of that gray color. So that's something that reminds me of, a future color they used.
And what's interesting, too, is that gray color, and we're looking at a photo of one that has aged over the years, it gets a little yellow, and there's almost something nostalgic about that yellowish gray. It's kind of weird. Like, I look at it, and I kind of like it, but I get that it's not, like, the true color at the time.
It's weird that the yellow, I thought that was only happens on whites. I always thought it was weird that I would, like, pick up Sega Saturn controllers, and I'd be like, why is this one more brown than this one? And it's the yellow. I didn't know that, but
right, yeah, because I mean, you can click around on the internet and see various stages of discoloration for these, and it's supposed to look just like kind of the same color as the controller slot for the SG-1000, which is just gray. But here, like you noted, it's a little yellow. It looks kind of like a military.
The Sega Saturn yellow.
It reminds me of like old military equipment, which I feel like either was green at the time or like turned greenish gray over the years. And I should note for people, we're not going to get like under the hood. We're not going to do technical specs of like the motherboard and like this and that. Like that's going to get a little tiring. But if you love that sort of stuff, I would recommend clicking on over to Sega Retro. Our dedicated wiki to all things Sega, because they have fantastic information. The team, they're like our sisters, right? Our sister site. So they do a great job.
Well, sisters, yeah.
Sister Sonic, sister
we're
site.
We're the Sega Girl Task Force here.
Exactly.
Did you see? And there's a Wikipedia entry on that, and that's an actual thing. So go over there and check it out.
I'll join that. So now let's start to look at things that might look a little more familiar. So we're going to be looking at the SJ150 now. And, thankfully Sega did not stick with the design we saw with the previous model, as in 1984 they introduced the SJ150, which looks a little similar to what Western Sega fans could expect in those early days from the company, starting with the Master System. The SJ150 featured detachable thumbsticks, so you can see that little hole there. You could screw a thumbstick into it or remove it.
Right.
And also 2 buttons there, but they are they're not quite circles.
They're like I don't even know how you would say that. Like Um, uh, they're longer basically than a circle.
Yeah, like elongated.
Elongated
Yeah,
circles.
Yeah, it's like a rectangle with very, very rounded corners.
Right.
And worth noting too, those are rubber, like rubbery buttons. They are not plastic.
I don't know. I've noticed that in controllers they only use the rubber buttons for like a start. They never use them for the actual game you touch, and I'm assuming it's because they wear down. So that would be an issue.
Yeah, that could be an issue. Thankfully, they did improve on that with the SJ151, the next image here.
They're kind of the same almost, huh?
Yeah, what they did was they just switched to circle buttons, and they are now plastic. That D-pad goes unchanged, but you can see in the image what that little stick would have looked like in place.
And it's funny that like they thought back then that people needed the arcade experience at their home with the arcade stick. Did you growing up, like we grew up in an era where like D-pads were already normalized for everyone, and we were moving on to analog sticks and joysticks that came back. Did you ever think as a kid, man, it'd be great if I had a little arcade stick I could put on here and play Sonic?
I mean, what I find weird about these is, like, did they intend for you to set it on a table and actually use your little fingers?
Yes. Yes.
Or do you put your thumb on it and, like, move it around with your thumb? Like,
have you seen Mike Matei play on the Genesis? Well, I guess we'll talk about it more when you get to the Genesis. But he plays the controller like with his hands like a joystick, where he uses, instead of like holding it like you hold the controller like you stereotype, he puts it down on his knee, and then he like has two index fingers moving the D-pad and then two index fingers tapping it like an arcade. I'm like,
oh, that's weird.
Have you played like that before?
No, I haven't. That's a kind of a freaky way to play. I like it though.
It seems very arcadey though. I guess it would make you feel like you're in an arcade, right? And the buttons on the Genesis kind of are big, so I guess it would work. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, they did a slight improvement again with the SJ152, which was the default controller for the Sega Mark III, also known as the Master System in America.
Joypad.
However, the Joypad, yes. So, however, despite the consoles sharing similar hardware, the controllers look a little different. Westerners will recognize the square D-pad and the two buttons. However, the shell of the controller is quite different.
Oh, yeah.
And you will see that the cable comes out from the right side, which is something that some Master System controllers did see, but here it was like coming out from the side. The removable thumbstick carried over, so we still have to deal with that. But what do you think about this look? Do you like that they... I mean, it's still on there. It's kind of hard to see, but the SJ152 is still there, but now it says Joypad really big.
It's weird because like the console's called SG3000 and the thing is called the Joypad, which is fine, but like, don't you think you should brand it what the console is instead of the just another name for it? Or are they more interested in selling them as third party? That's what it feels like.
You know, this was something weird Sega was doing at the time, and it really exploded with the Master System. Like the Sega Master System, if I recall, the console name is not on the... I'm looking over at my collection. The console name is not on the game case because... And the controllers... And let's bring up the Master System Joy control pad, actually.
Oh, yeah.
As the next one.
This one.
So the way Sega sold the Master System is it was a literal system, as in a system of different elements. So you had the games... You had the control pad. You had the Master System, which was the power base, if I'm correct.
Right.
But the games were not initially marketed as Sega Master System games. Like, you would look at the cover of the game, it does not say Master System on the box. And you look at the controller, and it does not say the Master System controller. And I think that was a huge mistake. I don't understand. It was like a weird... It's like, you know, the early days of video games. So I guess at the time, the idea of having a
bad
console...
branding.
Well, I think, yeah, with bad branding too, but I think the idea of having a console where everything connected to the console was just a part of that, like it was the Master System controller, the Master System games, but in their minds it was like, well, the game isn't the Master System's the console, and the controller isn't. In fact, it's not even a Master System. It's a power base, which is a part of the Master System.
The Master System is an ecosystem made
so
of
the
all
Master
these different
System
parts.
is a concept, and I almost feel like we are talking like Xbox did a generation ago, where
Right.
you'd see them take the stage, and they can't just like flat out say you put your disc in the machine and it plays. Instead, they were like, we're introducing a new concept. It's called the Xbox One. And you're like, oh, cool. Is that the console? One is an all-in-one experience. You know, like that's kind of how they approached it too. And it's like, you don't...
And then they also had
You don't
the
need-
FM like cards and like other
Mm-hmm.
extras, and you didn't even have to play cartridges actually, because you could play you could buy those little card things, the little plastic cards, or you could play
Right.
the games right off the BIOS.
That's true. So this was 1987, the Master System control pad, as we're seeing here. It was also called...
80s.
Very 80s. It was called the Sega control pad. It was the official controller packaged with the Sega Master System consoles. And like previous controllers we looked at, and some future controllers we'll look at soon, they connected to the system, again, using that 9-pin connector. Yeah, the controller saw various models released over time, but the changes were small. The first model saw the wire coming out from the right side. The second model had the wire coming out from the top, and the third model did away with the optional thumbstick and just kind of filled it in with black. And I believe that's what we're looking at here, is that Model 3. And this one was most commonly seen in Brazil with the Master System 2. Unlike the NES controller, which used letters for the action buttons, Sega uses the numbers 1 and 2, and the 1 button doubles as the start button. The pause button, meanwhile, is located on the console itself. So,
What do you think about
now-
1 and 2?
What do you think about 1 and 2?
Not good enough, buddy. I guess it makes sense because the NES was AB, or I think BA or
Yeah.
AB, so it would make
BA,
sense.
yeah.
So it was even, we didn't really have a concept, and I think the concept of lettering is also kind of the same thing as a 1-2. I think the
1-2.
only company that had a very interesting take on the buttons was Sony with the square X, the shapes. R1, like no one ever had shapes like that before. Everyone was like 1-2 or AB.
What do you
XY.
think? Do you know where the shapes go in your mind
For what?
Do you remember?
Controller?
for the PlayStation?
Yeah, square is the one that's on the top, and then it goes triangle on the top, right next to it, and then the bottom will go X, and then circle.
Okay.
Yeah,
I always
know.
found it weird. I hated playing Sonic, any Sonic or any game really with QTEs, because I would not remember where those are. It's so much easier with the letters and the numbers. But yeah, so how do you feel about the start button sharing an action button and the pause button being on the console?
I hated that. That's the worst. I guess it, like back in the 80s, people were in shape, so they would just be like, "Yeah, I'll just go in and pause it." But now I'm like, "Ew, I had my I died. Get up." No.
Yeah.
So that sucks. It's cool that now if you have like the I have the EverDrive, and I could just restart it and not have to get up. That's great on the Genesis, and not have to plug in another console for it. Even though I do have a Master System, I don't have to plug it in just to play or try out or capture footage for a Master System game. I could just play right off the Genesis.
Did you ever own a Master System?
I own a Master System, actually. The first model, the long one. And
Do your controllers have little missing little joypad holes? Do they have those?
I don't. I only played with other controllers. I never actually owned a controller specifically for the Masters. That's the only thing I don't have. And I actually looked it up one time online, and they were going for like 20 to 30, and I was like, are they really that much better to use than. And I don't even connect it anymore, so I was like, I'm not buying a controller for it.
Yeah, I believe I have 2 controllers for my Master System, and one or both of them are like, it's a hole. So clearly no one liked these. They unscrewed them and just like lost them. Because I've very rarely seen
the original,
the actual joystick sticking out of it. Did you know that the D-pad is a rounded square to avoid legal issues with Nintendo's patented cross-shaped design?
Yeah, I did.
It makes you wonder why the Dreamcast got away with it. I presume it's because they could no longer
patent the idea of a D-pad.
That idea of up, down, and left and right, directions.
You got to give it credit to Nintendo. They figured out a way to manufacture a controller, because I'm pretty sure they switched to this because it was cheaper, less moving parts, and it didn't break down as easily like a joystick did. So I got to give them props for actually creating that, because I think it cut cost and made everything more reliable for everyone. So it's great. It sucks that they have to sue everyone, and they're so happy to sue everyone. I mean, should that even be copyrighted, a D-pad?
I don't think so. I think it's a very basic thing. Like, I could understand copywriting,
or copyrighted. I mean, whatever they do, patent.
Patent.
Yeah.
I could understand the actual look of it, or the colors of the buttons, or like the ABC or the 1, 2, 3, whatever configuration. Because obviously, like PlayStation, it's part of its brand. Like, you can't have Xbox coming and being like, oh yeah, we're going to do square, circle, X, and triangle.
I was going to ask you, since the 9-pin is universal, as you talked about before, when did you find out that it wasn't only a Sega Genesis thing, like that you could actually use the pad on other devices?
I think when I watched Angry Video Game Nerd and he showed the Atari, because I never saw an Atari up close, and I saw that and I was like, that's insane. And then I finally got a 2600 for myself. Actually, I got a VCS, because it was before they put the numbering on it. I have one from Sunnyvale, California. It's the Heavy Sixer. It's very heavy. I love it.
Sunnyvale is a dump. Nice. No, I'm joking. It's not that bad. It's all right.
Well, that's where they made it, so I don't know. Let's jump ahead to the granddaddy, the one we really want to look at.
The daddy? What?
The Sega Mega Drive control pad.
I think I have.
Now this one, I think you have 1 or 2 in your house, but this was the official controller of the Sega Mega Drive Sega Genesis. It was released in 1988. It is perhaps the most iconic of all Sega's controllers, and there are actually quite a few variations on it, which would honestly be kind of exhausting to go through on this podcast. However, we'll cover a few of the big ones, but it is worth noting, like, you'll see little things like the letter buttons have different colors. The start button,
I think I have one
different
that's
colors
red somewhere, so that's why I noticed too. I wonder why they did that, just to make them. What do you think about the red to make them stand out? Too much?
I think it looks kind of. I like it. I think it looks cool.
It does stand out though, like compared to the design. I was just admiring the blue start button too on here compared to the white one that I usually see.
Well, it's cool because it's like it's the Sega blue, It's kind of neat that they worked their color in there. Now, the Mega Drive control pads, they replaced the 1 and 2 action buttons numbering system with a much more logical A, B, and C. And we, of course, have the addition of a third button with that C button, as well as a start button. D-pad, finally, and the D-pad is now circular, designed to allow for 8-way directional movement. Also worth noting, the letter buttons, referred to as triggers, are arranged in alphabetical order from left to right, unlike Nintendo's practice of going backwards. I never knew why they did that. Did you?
What do you mean backwards? As in
like B and A?
I don't know, but they literally destroyed me because all their platformers would be like, you hold the Y button, then you hit down the B or whatever. It's funny because in Japan, that's the reason that the Xbox has an X and a 0 and an O circle. It's because circle means accept and X means deny. But in America, we flipped it, so X is confirm and O is to go back. So it doesn't really make sense here. So we have this whole, like, in Japan, they do it differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we're all stuck in the background. It's almost like we drive right side of the road, buddy.
I'm so used to hitting A to pick anything. And so on any Nintendo console, the fact that A is the one to the right that picks things and B backs out means I'm always exiting menus when I'm playing a Nintendo console.
Especially if I don't play for a long time, I'm always exiting. It's annoying, but you get used to it after a while. It becomes second nature, but for sure.
Now, it's worth noting that the Mega Drive controllers were the first ergonomically designed controllers, and while they weren't perfect, they were a lot more comfortable to hold than the Sega Master System controller.
Just a flat slab.
So I'm sure this controller holds a lot of memories for you, so I wanted to hear about your experience using the Genesis controller and your thoughts on the design.
I thought it was huge. Obviously, now it doesn't seem that big. Now that I hold it here, that you told me to get a controller and to hold.
Yeah.
I remember I thought thinking that this is probably the biggest D-pad. I noticed right away how much better it was than the NES because of the little, how it's circular and it has the little, like, you could do it diagonally. I was just thinking about how I using this on Contra or something would be so sick, and I pretty much liked it. I thought it needed maybe a few more buttons because I thought it was weird that it only had 3. I'm like, why not 4? But I guess
right.
But I think it worked at the time because at the time we only had 2 to begin with anyway. So having an extra one just felt like they played it safe. Basically, they're like, let's just add an extra one real quick. Yeah. So the Super Nintendo obviously changed that for a lot of people because of all the more complex games that allowed. But I think most of the games Sega did at the time were arcade, so it was perfect. Sonic the Hedgehog only used one button. You only have to hit one. Pick your favorite out of all of these. You could play the whole game with it. But yeah, what about your first time playing it?
I mean, my first time holding a Genesis pad, like you said, it felt a little too big in my hands. Now, though, like, I feel like I've grown with it, and I can hold I'm holding the Heavy Sixer, which is the wireless one that is a combination of the 6-button, which we'll get to, on a classic sized pad, and it feels really good in my hands. I really like it, but I'm still a big 6-button fan, so once that finally came out, I picked that up, and that became my Player 1 pad, and then the fat original one was demoted to Player 2, but I still really love it. I like the idea of having, like, matte for most of the controllers, so it's nice and grippy, and then glossy, these, like, little glossy islands where the buttons are. It makes your fingers kind of float over the button area. I don't know. It's crazy. It's just kind of... Yeah.
It's crazy how much more professional this controller is than we go a couple of generations when you see this white slab that looks like it's a cheap Chinese product that was just, like, kicked out for a generic console. Now you actually see some good branding here. Like you said, the little islands that are glossy with the matte finish, the black. It kind of like I guess solidified Sega's image at the time, which it was like this cool 80s back alley Ferrari type look.
Right, that's a great point. I mean, two things. This controller came out like 3 or 4 years after the first one, the J150 we looked at.
Right.
And yeah, like, what a leap of 3 years to that.
Yeah.
And also, I think you make a good point too. I feel like Sega started to look to cars, like, for their, and it's in the name, Mega Drive, you know, like, it feels like they were targeting those people who liked sports cars, and I think that aesthetic really fits. It stopped looking like a computer or a kid's toy, and it started looking like a high class machine, and that's what you want when you have games that are so fast.
Right.
Now, a really interesting thing I found in my research is that in the early development for the Mega Drive control pad, there were plans to encourage developers to support reverse orientations, where players could flip the controller upside down and play with the buttons on the left and the D-pad on the right, and the cord would come down, which is funny because that's what the Dreamcast ended up doing for its right side up. The reverse mode idea would be implemented in software. However, very few, if any, developers actually went this direction. Only one game is known to support reverse mode, and that game is Grindstormer.
Never heard of it.
The existence of this mode is only mentioned once in a November 1988 edition of Beep magazine, which was actually discovered 30 years after its publication. Someone found the magazine, scanned it. So before we recorded, I actually went on with my EverDrive, and I loaded up Grindstormer, and in the menu it says orientation or something, and it says left or right control, and so I played a game like this.
It feels like it's playable. Like I'm doing it now, and it feels like it feels pretty comfortable. And the little spiky like Batman ears on the top, they feel nice having your thumbs. Yeah, like that. Exactly. That's what I was doing right now. It feels nice.
And so this was designed to be played upside down, and no one utilized it except for one game.
I think
Isn't that weird?
I think EverDrive needs to have a mode where you could just play all games upside down.
Upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for people listening or for yourself, like, try that out. It's not something I do often because I'm fine with the orientation going this way, but it totally works.
I never played that game. Is it good, at least?
Grindstormer. Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it's a shmup.
Okay.
It's from a pretty notable company. Trying to see who did it. Toaplan? I always see their name show up.
Oh, I see. They're one of those like weird Japanese small studios.
They did Zero Wing.
Oh.
They did Snow Bros.
I've noticed that those people that do those, like, they're like smaller, they always have all these options in their games compared to bigger studios.
They published Musha. They didn't develop it, but they published it. Yeah. But yeah, so I thought that was really interesting that not only was this actually designed to be used upside down, but someone actually, like, it's just kind of wild that it made it through. With them kept saying, you just be mindful that we will have upside down games, and then no one did it.
I don't think anybody would have used it or would have been a good selling. It would just confuse people. It'd be like, what? Why?
Because I guess I never bought that because, like, if you're left-handed or right-handed, I feel like video games you're still all playing the same way. Like, it's not like I'm right-handed, but it's not like my left hand is stupid when it's doing this.
Right.
Like, it knows what it's doing.
When we're doing it upside down, I felt the same exact way as playing it the other way.
Yeah. So now we're going to jump to the... I mentioned there's several variations. And so I think the biggest improvement on this classic controller is the 6-button control pad.
So tiny.
So the 6-button control pad was released as a premium controller for the Genesis and Mega Drive and was intended to make certain games, especially fighting games, easier to play on the console. It served as an optional replacement for the standard pad and is officially known as the 6-button arcade pad in North America and as the Fighting Pad 6B in Japan. 6B. Which name do you like?
Neither of them. You could just call it the 6-button controller. That's what everyone called it, right?
Right. Yeah, and there's two main types of 6-button control pads. I didn't realize this until like a few years ago.
I have the
So there's a smaller model originally intended for Japan, which is, and I bring that up because when the Mega Drive Mini 2 came out, it came with the 6-button pad, and I was like, oh, they're cutting corners. They're cheap. They like made them smaller than the original ones because they're actually the Japan size.
Does it have a blue button on it as the start?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, that's the one I have.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, it is tiny.
Yeah, so if you imported it, as opposed to buying the American one, the pads are different sized for the recent released mini consoles.
Why is that?
Well, it's because Westerners have much larger hands than anyone else in the world. It's it's genetics, George. It's genes.
Oh.
I don't know. Like I looked it up. I was like, why do they do this? And like on the wikis, they were like, Asian countries, people have smaller hands. So I'm like, is that true?
And even if you had
so.
smaller hands, would you really like it's not even that much bigger though. Like to the point where it's like, they're like, what is this monstrosity? And they just throw it. It's like the original pad was bigger than both of them.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know the reasoning, but. The 6-button pad is functionally identical to the previous pad, but features 3 more face buttons. So we now have X, Y, and Z. The start button is moved to the center of the pad. Some games do not work with the 6-button control pad, however, so Sega added a mode button on the top of the controller, which, if held while the system is booting, will allow the controller to operate as a 3-button pad. And I never knew that as a kid. A small number of games also make use of the mode button within play, effectively making it a 7th button. The 6-button control pad would be used as the basis for the next pad we are going to be looking at. But before we get to that, let's share our love for good old 6B. Did you see this controller as an improvement?
100%. I mean, it was crazy lame. I mean, like, I remember playing Street Fighter 2, like renting it, being all happy, and being like, waddling to my Sega Genesis, plopping it in there, and then having to press start to kick. It's like, what is this? This is nonsense. So you, like, I don't know if you played Street Fighter 2 Turbo on the 3-button controller, but you have to press start to switch the 3 buttons to kick, and then press start again to press them to punching. So
that's no good.
And there's no start button to actually start the game. So there's no whatever it does when you press the start button. Very bad. This is a great improvement. It should have been shipped day one if they knew. I'm sure they regretted having to deal with all this.
Right.
There's also, I don't know if you knew this or you do this, there's patches for games that people put on ROM sites online where, like, you could play Shinobi 3 with the actual 6-button controller having weapons. The best one I played, I think it was Comic Zone, where the... you could already use it, I think. I don't know what the hack was. I'm trying to remember another hack that I used. But anyway, what do you think about the 6-button controller?
I love it. Like I said, like when I got it, I just thought it felt a lot better in my hands. I think the shape is interesting too. It's much more like a boomerang, whereas I feel like this one's just much more iconic in its shape. I look at this and I immediately it's got like a Batman feel, but I look at this and I immediately think Sega Genesis. I look at the outline of this, it looks like, I don't know, like a floppy, like I don't know, like a floppy sausage or something. Like it's just a funny,
a very high tech car version of a Puyo.
Yeah,
it's
kind of.
Like,
yeah,
it's like shaped all weird like that. But yeah,
it's still cool though. I mean, it's very well designed. It's just it's different. Now, George, let's talk about.
A lot of people think this next pad is one of the best pads ever created.
We got to do it. So, let's talk about it. The Sega Saturn control pad, simply known as the controller in North America, was an evolution of the 6-button control pad for the Genesis. It released in 1994 alongside the console. Gamers in the know that this is an excellent controller. They also probably know that Sega also released an incredibly terrible controller for the same console with the same button orientation. We'll get to that piece of trash soon.
Is that the one I have right here? No, I'm joking.
No, you better not be. Let's all praise the wonderful Saturn controller. Praise it.
Praise it. Thank you, Sega-tan Sanshiro. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Thank you. So like the 6-button controller, the Saturn controller features an 8-way directional D-pad, a start button in the center that is now a beautiful rubber, as well as the recognizable ABC and XYZ button added. To the mix are left and right triggers with the satisfying click to them. Does yours still click?
Yes.
Yes, it's very nice. It's like a mouse click. It is also worth noting that the controller itself has what appears to be music CD controls above certain buttons, which correspond to the Sega Saturn's ability to play music CDs and make for controlling your music much easier because you don't have to search around and figure out what button does which. It also shows that the controller is very much a product of its time because audio CDs were a big deal back then, whereas nowadays it would be incredibly tacky to like pick up an Xbox Series X controller and have like DVD player controls on it, you know.
It'd be like the equivalent of having a button that just gets you into Netflix on your controller.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which, yeah, you don't want that. So when did you first hold this beautiful boy, and what are your thoughts on the form factor?
Kiosk, playing Knights. I liked it. I thought it was great. I felt great in my hand. I thought I liked that weird textured feel outside of the glossy thing and the outside. I thought it felt great. I like the buttons. You said the clicking of the shoulder buttons is it has a very good feeling to it. I even opened it up, when you clean them inside, when you get new ones, like when you buy them used. Sometimes you get people that have them in the bottom of barrels with dust. So I opened them up and I wash them all out, and man, just clicking it from the PCP board, I'm just like, can't wait to put this thing together. It has the best click, 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 click. Before I put them away.
That should be a whole episode. We talk about best clicky things.
Oh yeah, the clicking episode. But I love it. I think it's a great controller. The best controller ever. It's kind of hard because now we evolved to have different features in controllers to be like. But I think this is the magnus opus of Sega's 2D controllers for 2D games, for sure.
100%. Yeah, like for as far as like ranking things that are boxed with the original console, this one definitely comes out ahead. For me, I believe the first time I held one was quite a bit later. I think in the mid 2000s, I got or actually late 2000s, I got a white Saturn. And that's where I got the white pad with the colorful buttons. And I was like, oh, this feels so good in my hands. And meanwhile, it was like back in 1999, I bought my first Saturn. It was a black one. And it came with two of these. So let's check out the next image.
I have one of these. I have every Saturn controller just because I want to have a copy of one. But yeah, no, this is not the greatest, no.
No. So let's talk about perhaps the ugliest and worst controller that we'll probably talk about on this episode. Now,
I mean, when I was trying to fix one of these, I noticed that there's actually people with nostalgia for this controller. So you might get a little bit of haters saying that you're wrong. This controller feels incredible in their hands because they have the biggest hands of all time. They come to you and they're
maybe,
sir, this is a good controller.
But yeah, but this was the North American and European version of the controller. It was called the MK8010, and it was released in 1995. As you mentioned, it was like built to accommodate for bigger hands. The controller is slightly larger and has a strange concave D-pad. I hate that D-pad. I don't like it at all. You've never seen that before or since on a Saturn console. I don't know who designed this. I wonder if Japan did or if someone in America did this and Japan was like, what the hell are you doing?
It feels like someone just like... I don't even know. Like, it's weird because it looks like the Sega Saturn pad, but then you start noticing they just added this weird, like, big shape over it.
It looks like a 6-button Genesis pad with, like, more pad built around it.
Yeah.
Like, if you just look at the shiny part, it's like I don't know.
I don't think, and it feels so hollow, too. You own one? I mean, you said you own two, so
yeah,
it doesn't feel great.
They feel very light. And then just from a design perspective, I think it's very weird that it has the Sega logo, but then it also has the Sega Saturn up there. Like, it's like you're saying Sega twice, whereas the previous pad, like, it only says Sega Saturn, and I don't know why you need to say Sega again. Now, I don't hate this. I don't hate it, but I was really upset that this is what I had for like 10 years until I finally got a white Saturn. But yeah, everything about it just feels cheap. It feels lightweight. It doesn't play well for me. And thankfully, this model was replaced the following year in the West they claimed as a cost-cutting measure. However, I think they just realized people didn't like it and they should go with the original pad. You think I'm being too hard on it?
It's not the worst pad I've ever played in my entire life, but it's a sin to have a design like the original Sega Saturn pad. And okay, I'll give Sega some credit. I own a lot of pads. I own the Japanese one. I own the American, the ones we like. And there is some difference between the Japanese one. I feel like the American smaller one, not this one, feels more high quality than the Japanese pads. And this one just... So this is a downgrade for sure. The Japanese pad is better than this one, but I feel like the American black one is actually better than the Japanese one. I don't know if you have a black American model for the 6-button Saturn pad.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I'll have to check. I have a wireless one. It's actually just inches away there. It's the one with the two little joysticks on the bottom that they recently released, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, I don't have that original US model.
The controllers are pretty inexpensive, I think, for the Saturn. I think having Retrobit make these like third-party controllers that you can just buy from them for $20 made the market in Sega controllers like not go crazy, so you could get them pretty cheap.
That's good. Well, I'm glad you're talking about different ones. So yeah, there's several different color variation of the Saturn controller made to match the color of the console. So Japan initially received gray pads, but eventually saw white and clear versions designed for V Saturns and High Saturns. They had all these different models. It is important to note... That's true, too. Yeah, it's important to note that in Japan, the controllers saw a red start button, a green A button, a yellow B button, and a blue C button. And in the West, we all had black and gray buttons. And in Brazil, oddly, they had like pink buttons. What do you think about this? Did you like that they stripped the colors from the controller? Why do you think they did that?
I think to keep it in line with this being the second Sega Genesis, like right when you see it, you're like, oh, that's the Sega Genesis. I remember that when I played the Sega Genesis. So I think that's why they did it. Should they play with color? I would have loved if they played with like alternatives. I think that's something that we never had in the West compared to Japan, where they get multiple colors and they could go and your mom could be like, oh, I bought the gray Sega Genesis or whatever. So it's something they had in Japan and we didn't have here. Which ones of these controllers do you is on your want list to own?
I think the JP Skeleton model is the coolest one.
Yeah. I don't know.
And then runner up would actually probably be just like the basic gray model. Because I like I said, I own the American black console with the two ugly pads, and then I have the which is I guess Model 1 console, and then I have a white Japanese Saturn, which I guess is the Model 2.
Yes.
But I don't have that gray pad, and I think that would honestly I'd like to have a gray Saturn. I think those look really cool.
I have so many of the gray pads. We'll talk later. I'll send you one. I mean, I'm just saying I have so many of them that I can just send you one. I'm like, I don't know. You want it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take it. But, yeah. So, what do you think about those white and pink models from Brazil?
Ugly. I mean, they kind of remind me of the Play Sega controller they did after... remember when they did those... do you remember that Play Sega? Yeah.
I wonder if it's sitting next to me. Sometimes I keep things here.
But
I have it, actually. It's right next to me here.
It reminded me of that kind of. Those were different colors, I think. Yeah, it's blue instead of that. But it kind of reminds me of that vibe. Instead of it, it's the pink version of it.
Yeah, and the clickies are a little different, too.
Yeah, they're not as high quality as the originals.
It's still a cool pad, though. And it's a cool, part of Sega's weird history of that...
history that no one really talks about too. I think all the games for Play Sega were gone, but
what I think's funny is on the back it's called a propaganda item. I don't know. I mean, I guess it was for it was like a giveaway,
So it was like a little service thing they did.
Yeah, so in China, I guess they call it a propaganda item.
Nice.
So, anyway. So now we're going to be getting into another Saturn pad. This is bringing us closer to the Sega Dreamcast. And this is Saturn's 3D control pad. This was released in 96. It's also called the Sega Multi-Controller in Japan, Samsung Multipad in South Korea, and Joystick 3D in Brazil. This controller debuted with Nights into Dreams and features an analog thumbstick which allows for greater precision of movement in a 3D environment. The 3D control pad has all the features of the standard Saturn pad, but adds an analog thumbstick or 3D directional pad, as Sega referred to it as, in that upper left-hand corner. The D-pad is still, it's the D-pad we know and love, but the shoulder buttons are now triggers, which was a first for mainstream video game controllers. And, of course, the Dreamcast fans will definitely recognize the look and feel of those. Just like the 6-button control pad on the Genesis, there were compatibility issues with the controller. However, instead of relying on a mode button, it was much more user-friendly with a switch on the bottom that allowed players to swap between digital and analog modes. Another interesting addition is the ability to remove the controller's cable, which later on was speculated as being there for future use that Sega never got around to taking advantage of, and we'll talk about those future uses. Did you use the 3D control pad before ever touching a Dreamcast?
No, so I never even knew this existed when I had a Dreamcast. So it was all surprising to me. It's not one of those controllers that everyone owned. I think it was only marketed with Knights. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much it cost to make and how much it cost at the time, but I feel like this should have been the controller that actually came out for the Sega Saturn, like the original one, if you're going to be promoting, or a variation of this, if you're going to be promoting 3D games as your, I guess, future, in a way. This feels like a 3D game controller. So, yeah.
At least it should have come out a lot earlier, because the problem is it came out in, 98. Yeah, what else came out in 98?
The Dreamcast in Japan, for sure.
Right?
So.
Didn't it come out in 98? Oh, 96. I'm sorry. It came out in 96.
Okay, 96. Okay, that is kind of early. I'll give it that.
So it was early. But the Saturn came out in 95. This came out in 96. It started to die in 97. So it's like...
it's an additional investment you have to make. I don't know how much they were. I'm assuming they were bundled, probably like $100 bundled with a game.
Yeah.
So
you want me to tell you how much it was?
Yeah. I mean, I think Sega Retro has it on their website. But besides that, they had a black one, right? And then they had this one, or is it a gray one they had?
So in the U.S. they had a black one. It was $40 in the United States, which isn't terrible, but I guess with inflation,
it's less
also
than a game.
In Japan it was 3,800 yen, which
sounds about the same.
Which is $25.
Oh, they got it way cheaper. I'm not trying to do math in my head. I'm converting 1990s.
I don't know what the conversion was at that time though.
Yeah, because we have two economies that are different at different time periods, so we don't really, whatever. It's not that bad, I would say. Actually, now they go for $100. So if anything, you made your money back.
Yeah, I got to buy my Saturn in 1999.
Whoa.
Shortly after the Dreamcast came out. So I was the Dreamcast pad was kind of new to me, and then I got Knights with this pad, and I was like, oh, now I understand. This is the bridge between the Sega Genesis pad and the Dreamcast pad, and it just all made sense when I held this one. It was not widely adopted, though. It never took over as the main controller for the console, so you didn't see bundles released where it was the console and one of these included instead of the classic pad. Interestingly, any game that's compatible with steering wheel controllers and the mission stick works with this. Notable games that use the control pad, the 3D control pad, are Burning Rangers, Nights into Dreams, Croc, Daytona USA, Enemy Zero, House of the Dead, the Panzer Dragoon games, the Sega Rally games, Sonic Jam, Sonic R, Virtual Cop 2, and Wipeout 2097. And from my own experience, like, I feel like one of these, it's essential to own one just because it's really great for, obviously, Knights and Burning Rangers, but also Panzer Dragoon, Sonic Jam, and Sonic R. And when you look at the retail prices on those games now, it's like, if you own any of those games, you might as well pick one of these up, because it's like...
you're rich.
Yeah, you're rich.
Or you're burning a lot of disc.
Why do you think this didn't take over as the main pad?
Well, at least in America, I don't know how it was in Japan. Dying console, very few games that supported it. Asking someone that just paid $500 for your console to add another $40 for a separate controller that supports 10 games, it's kind of like a harsh thing. They were in a really bad spot. I'm going to do a hot take here. I think this controller is better than the Dreamcast controller in like terms of how it feels and the quality of the buttons and the clicking and the tactile.
Wow.
So I think it's a good controller. What about you? Why do you think it didn't take off?
I mean, I think it's good too. I think it didn't take off because Sega didn't put all their force behind it. I think if Sega swapped out the controller
like right
in
away,
the console bundles, with this as soon as possible. It's interesting. I'm looking here in the U.S. The Nights into Dreams bundle with this controller was $70.
That's like $20 extra for the controller. Exactly.
It was a $50 game. You get $20 extra for the controller, or you spend $35 for the controller on its own. Like, obviously. So I think that was the plan. They were like, well, Knights is the killer app. Everyone's going to own Knights, so everyone's going to get their 3D control pad through Knights instead of buying a new console, which maybe that was their thought process. But, clearly it didn't take over, which is unfortunate because I do think it's a really cool controller. It's interesting, too, because Kenji Takoshi, who led the development for the controller, who was previously in charge of the Virtua Gun, which we talked about on our Virtua Cop podcast, the 3D control pad was specifically designed to accompany Nights into Dreams, and many design cues were actually taken from the XE1AP analog thumbstick controller previously released for the Mega Drive in 1989 in Japan. During the development, several patents were actually filed for numerous add-on concepts covering a number of possible extensions to the design of the controller. These ideas included wireless connections to the console, light gun support, extra joysticks, trackballs, memory cards, a second display, clocks, a rotatable stand, and a motion control. And out of all of these concepts, a gyroscopic motion control would make it as far as physical prototypes. However, it did not make it to the final product because there were concerns over the marketability and viability of add-on peripherals for what was already a peripheral. So that explains that little disconnector thing, because I think they were like, oh, disconnect it, pop on this extra thing that I presume is going to have its own cord, and then connect it to the console, which is interesting because obviously with the Dreamcast pad, that's what the VMU slots were.
Right.
You could put a jump pack, you could put a microphone, you could put a VMU, but I think this was just a little, and that was even one of the plans, was like a second screen. So imagine that, like you had to buy, if you wanted like a second screen for your 3D control pad, you buy this weird little screen with like a little plug at the bottom, and it has its own wire. You remove the wire from this and now pop that into your 3D control pad. Like, that's a bit much, don't you think?
Yeah, or maybe even buy a different connection cord for the Sega Genesis, and then you could play on your Nomad or your Genesis as a...
That would have been cool.
I mean, little things like that. It's interesting take. You could tell that Sega was forward thinking, and they were thinking about modular design where you could like disconnect portions of your console and then put a different device in and make it work with something different. I mean, that is really smart, and I think that's what the expansion slot that came out from the VMU came from the idea of adding a second screen to this device.
Right. Exactly.
So it's pretty innovative, but I mean, like you said, a lot of those ideas, the gyroscope and all these other ideas you had, they're all now kind of mainstream ideas, and Nintendo tried the second screen with the Wii U. It's not no. outside of they were just too ahead of the curve that no one was pioneering it yet.
Well, I feel like we're talking about the Dreamcast pad, so let's bring it up. This is I guess, the last thing we're going to be talking about.
It looks like a sperm.
Did you freak out when you saw it?
It looks like a sperm.
It kind of does.
I think in some of the advertisements they actually used it as a sperm, right?
I think they did, actually, yeah. So, released in 1998, the Dreamcast controller is the primary way to play Sega Dreamcast games. Mm-hmm. The controller is notable for being Sega's final primary controller for a home console and for bringing together old concepts from past consoles and innovative new concepts that have never been utilized since in a home console controller. The controller was a progression from the Saturn 3D pad, and it was the first and only Sega console bundled controller equipped with analog controls, which is interesting. So the top left controller saw the analog thumb pad above a 4-way directional D-pad and a start button in the center of the console, a B and XY buttons, and then the 2 triggers. Now, what are missing are the C and Z buttons. So before we share our thoughts on the controller, what do you think about Sega dropping the C and Z buttons and going with that, like, Nintendo D-pad?
I mean, no one really used them that well outside of fighting games. I thought it was bad, not good, because they kind of like cemented themselves as the arcade company. The Sega Dreamcast had the most arcade games, and I feel like this is the part where they blurred what was possible from arcade to this. So having the 6-button layout would have made sense, especially for the Street Fighter games that sold the most on here. The good thing for Sega, I think, is Marvel vs. Capcom 2 a 4-button controller? I think you use the triggers for the assist, right?
I think so, yeah. Essentially, the triggers became the Z and C buttons.
Right. And maybe they could have added a couple shoulder buttons, but that's a new thing now. But I guess it was really modern because nobody ever went back to the 6-button front-facing buttons, so maybe they were forward-thinking. I mean, who else has ever done the same thing Sega's done with the 6?
That's a good point. I feel like what they should have really done is put all 6 of those on there and bring over the Saturn D-pad. Then it would have been perfect.
Yeah, the Saturn.
And I know people have more complaints about it, but that was my only real complaints. I still love this controller.
But the triggers do feel more cheap than the triggers on the Saturn pad, and so does the analog stick, right? Don't you think? Or are you okay with, like, it's not bothering you where you're like, I need to change this?
I think the analog stick's better than the 3D control pad, but I think the triggers on this are a little cheap. Mine creak.
Yeah, mine
they
does too.
Make little squeaky sounds.
Yeah, the spring, you hear it.
But yeah, so the biggest addition to the Dreamcast controller were the 2 expansion slots on the top, as well as that window screen for the VMU or the VMS, which is a visual memory system, depending on your region. The expansion ports allowed players to use memory cards with or without screens, as well as jump packs, which brought a rumble sensation to games, or the microphone, which was used with a handful of games. The Dreamcast controller is the largest control pad for any of the Sega systems and was not redesigned during the console's run, which, if we look back at all of the console we've talked about on this episode, that's pretty unique. Like, there is no Model 2 Dreamcast pad. The controller did see its fair share of criticism. We touched on some of them here.
I think there's companies that are still trying to make the perfect Dreamcast controller. Like Retrobit is, for example, is trying to do one. So
they are, yeah. People would complain about it feeling uncomfortable for those with larger hands, which is weird to me because I feel like it's made for larger hands already.
People in America have such large hands that not even the Sega Dreamcast controller could keep them down.
It was also said that the thumb pad had high sensitivity, and it was stated that the lack of a second thumb pad was a disadvantage when compared to the PlayStation 2, as well as the lack of rumble features being built in. Do you agree with any of these criticisms, and do you think some of them are kind of like, not a big issue?
I mean, the rumble, when it came out, I was firm that the rumble is whatever. It doesn't impact anything. I do like rumble because it adds weight to the controller, so I felt like this controller felt a little too light, which was good. That's why I always play with the jump pack, or I would play with two VMUs sometimes because I just like it feeling a little more heavier. So at least you had that option. Yeah. With the Dreamcast, so you kind of make, you don't really, it's not that big a deal.
Right.
About, what was the other one? The
lack of a second.
Oh yeah, the second joystick sucked because it really did kind of like made some games play a little weirder. Like Quake 3, for example, you had to use the front-facing buttons to move and then aim. So that's kind of annoying, and I wish they designed it, but I don't know how it would look like this controller, this setup with a second joystick. Yeah. Just add it right there.
It would be below the letter buttons, but then it would be like your thumbs would be jumping between. I mean, I guess it works on the. I guess what I didn't like about that is they were like, it's not the PS2, and I'm like, well, it's not a PS2. Like, that's their system. That's not what Sega's system is, and Sega got along just fine without a second one. I think, I don't know, like, to me, it wasn't that big a deal. I think it was a bigger deal to have, like, kind of a cheap D-pad.
I think they're the only ones that generation that didn't do it. Xbox did it, and they even had the 6-button facing if you include the black and white button.
Right, those are the weirdest buttons.
I don't know.
Yeah. Another criticism was the wire coming out of the bottom.
I didn't care.
But you could kind of fix that with the clip. Yeah, I didn't care either. I always thought that was a weird complaint because it's like, clip it up there. And I don't understand why people were confused by that. I'm like, do you see how much tech like is going to be stuck in the top? There's no room for the wire to come out
of the top
behind the jump pack,
right?
And it would obstruct the jump pack if it was coming out directly from the controller. So it was a non-issue for me.
100%.
Now, like I said, we did a whole episode on the Dreamcast pad, so you can check that one out. But let's just take a quick look at the many variations that this controller had. There are quite a few. So we're not going to go through all of them, but just, George, looking at all of these different colors, what is your favorite and what is the weirdest one to you?
I mean, I already picked my two favorites. I have them up here on my little tabs. The leopard one, the cheetah print one, so Yakuza, so nice. The black,
100%,
very classy. And I like the camo one, very southern, very Georgia feel, very Texas boy feel. Go out, hunt, play some Dreamcast. Deer hunting on Dreamcast, please. So I like those two. I think they're cool. They're very. You don't see camo and you don't really see leopard print controllers every day from a company like that. So
those are great picks. Yeah, I think my favorite would probably be, and I'm trying to remember which one it is. It's the Seaman one, the skeleton one, where it's completely clear.
It's a Japanese one, right?
Yeah, and they had a clear one that was called Smoke, but that was like grayish black see-through. This one's just like straight like clear plastic, and they released that one with it was the Seaman model, and I think they did it again. But yeah, the other one is the Millennium 2000 Black or Smoke, but I really like that completely clear one because I have a clear console. Clear Dreamcast console using
the clear era. Remember when everything was clear and you could see inside, and now they don't do that anymore?
Oh, I love it. I love my clear Dreamcast because you can see the game disc spinning. It's so cool, and like when it stops, you can see the artwork through the lid.
It's like when
really neat.
It's like when you first see a washing machine that you can see the ends. You're like, oh my god, what's? Yeah.
Another one would be the orange Choo Choo Rocket model, just because at least for a long time it was very affordable.
Oh, it's not affordable now? It
was not that I don't know if it still is, but like the pack-in limited edition Choo Choo Rocket from Japan was not hard to come by.
I like the color.
Yeah, me too. And then I think the weirdest one is probably Christmas Seaman.
Oh yeah.
And I touched one of those. I touched the one from Sega's headquarters.
It looks like a McDonald's controller.
It's so weird because like there's so much red. There's like no variation.
Yeah.
The start button's red. The bit that's supposed to be light gray is red.
I like
the bit that's supposed to be white is red.
The puke green joystick.
And the A button is a different red.
It's almost like they're
so
trolling
funny.
you.
It's like, yeah, it's like everything's red, but the A button is not the same red, and the D-pad is a different blue, and the green one, yeah, it's like they bring the colors from the other buttons over, but they're different. It looks so cheesy.
What do you think about the super black one that's just literally black? Like the joystick's black, the D-pad's black. I'm surprised the buttons were in black. That would have made it even more black. I feel like there was.
Yeah, it does.
I was gonna say that I feel like there was some sort of like design guide for them where the buttons have to stick to the color. Do they really change in any of these variants?
I mean, that's basically the Sega Sports model, the super black.
But they added a black D-pad and a black joystick. But that's about the only thing. But I was just wondering right now. Notice how they all have the same button, front-facing button colors, and none of them have a variation of them. I wonder if they weren't allowed to. Like, there was a design guide by Sega where the front-facing buttons have to be the same exact color every single time.
You know, I'll bet you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just something I noticed.
Weird.
But yeah.
There's so many of them, though. But
Japan got the best ones.
Yeah. An interesting fact about the Dreamcast console and controller is that the design lead, Hideki Sato, placed the triangular shape on the console as being meant to point to the player, and the controller replicates this triangular shape with the start button, which points back at the machine. So there's this like interaction of them pointing to each other, which I thought was really cool. It's like you start the machine and that red button's like going, it's your turn, and then you're like, I gotcha, and you press the start to point back at it. Isn't that cool?
I like it. I like little designs like that. Like when you find out, like, I don't know, it's just good branding, right? Like little things you notice, like the FedEx having the little arrow or whatever on the logo. You're like, oh, nice.
Yeah, and I love too how the controller, the Dreamcast controller, has that circle, which is the lid on the console. Like, it's just, there's a lot of shapes that are carried over between the two. I think just like design wise, it's the most iconic Sega controller shape next to the Genesis. Like, you put these two side by side in silhouette, and everyone's going to know what they're looking at.
Right.
And it was also a hope of the design team to have a wireless controller, but that dream was never realized. I'll bet you anything the VMU was an issue.
100%.
I think even Retrobit in their designs I see, I think the VMU is not going to be able to go in the controller because your save data would corrupt.
I heard that, didn't they delay one? Didn't they have a design wireless controller that was delayed, and I don't think they've actually released it.
Hasn't come out yet.
I think they're still working on it. I do know, I don't know if you've seen this, is off topic, but they're making a VMU2 fan-made. Have you seen that?
I have. It's coming out now. It's very expensive though.
$200, I think, $250 or something.
Yeah, you can buy 2 Dreamcasts right now for that price.
I know that it's a niche product. They have to make money because it's expensive what they're using in the parts. I think it's cool that they're doing it. I just think it's pretty awesome. Because, I mean, we all grew up with the Dreamcast and been like, imagine the Dreamcast 2 and there's a VMU that's colored and it has a black backlight and you can play your games on the go, and it's like a hybrid handheld console, basically the Switch. But back then,
my dream was that the VMU2 would have a headphone port, and it could
play MP3s.
Play MP3s,
oh, man.
yeah, that you download from the internet.
I mean, they did have that idea, but oh my god, imagine how sick it was, because like the VMU is so nice and tiny, and it fits perfectly in your keychain. It was kind of like a Tamagotchi, and it would have been awesome to be able to play your chow and listen to music on your way.
Would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Oh well. So yeah, we've taken a look at almost every main controller for all the Sega consoles, from the SG-1000 all the way to the Dreamcast. And now it is time for us. We're not going to share what we think. We're gonna agree.
Well, before we get to that, I did ask one question before we.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Controller do you play now modernly? Like, there's these consoles, right? The Xbox Series controller has a new redesign. Nintendo has their Pro controller, their Joy-Cons. PS5 has their revision of their PlayStation Pad. Finally. Which one are you the one using on your PC? Like, if you had to use one of these to play anywhere, which one are you using?
Outside of Sega?
Yeah, well, yeah, no Sega. I'm talking about just the new consoles that just came out.
Okay, I would actually go with the base Xbox One pad.
Okay, you like that one? I used the one pad for a long time on PC, but I finally tried. And the only thing that sucks on PC is that they don't change the buttons. You know, like when you see the buttons on screen, it's the Xbox ones. But I used the PlayStation 5 one, and I'm actually shocked. The haptic feedback and the little like designs they use, like the gyro to actually aim. I'm trying to use it more on some games, and I'm like, Xbox needs to support that, because I really do like the D-pad on the new Series X series, the console. I like the little click it does. I mean, you know, when you click the D-pad, it has a little click. Tactile feedback click. I like it. I just wouldn't use it because it doesn't have all these other features like gyroscope, and this one has a lot more like cool feedback. I don't know if you've played any of the games that use feedback on the unique features on the. Have you ever played Astrobot?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it has this. It's one of those games basically that's made for the controller to show off the features of it. It's interesting. Definitely worth trying out if you see it in the mall or whatever. But yeah, that's the one I've been using. So your Xbox One, what particularly do you like about that one? Just kind of grew on you?
I think it's just because ever since Sega went third party, the Xbox was my go-to for like Jet Set Radio and for any of the Sonic games. And so I'm just used to like the 360 pad in my hands. And then when the One came out, I bought it very late in its life. But yeah, I just kind of picked it up and I'm like, this just feels right. Like I play Sonic games better with it, and since I mostly play Sonic games, it's kind of like, yeah, that works. And then the weird thing is that I find it strange to play Yakuza with an Xbox pad. So I really like the PlayStation 4 pad for the Yakuza series, but I really like the Xbox pad for the Sonic series, and I don't like playing Sonic games with a PlayStation pad. It just feels weird to me.
I think the Series X, the series, it's just a revision of the same one. I feel like the Xbox One kind of got the sweet spot for their design, for Xbox at least. I agree. Yeah. I used it a lot. I love the controller. I think it's great. It's very much like the Dreamcast in a way, if you think about the shape of it closer than maybe the boomerang little thing that the PlayStation has is a little different thing. But anyway, let's go about our cool Patreons.
No, we're gonna decide first together. What do we think is the worst controller out of all the ones we looked at? And I think I know which one.
The Dreamcast. No, I think the SG-1. Obviously, we're not talking about before the Sega Genesis. I was obviously say the SG-1000. It only has 2 click buttons.
Yeah,
it looks really bad.
It would be easy to call out the Western version of the Saturn pad, but you can't look at that original SG-1 like remote control and say, oh, this is better than that. No way. That's the worst one.
And it's really harsh for me to say the Dreamcast because it does have issues, but like you said, there's just so little aspects of it that you're like, oh, but the VMU slot, oh, but then the start button was iconic. Oh, the way, and so you're like, I guess the Dreamcast if you had to pick one.
Could we agree that the SG-1000 one was the worst, but the Dreamcast is the weirdest. And I don't mean weird in a negative way, but it is weird. It is the weirdest controller, right?
Right. I would say yeah, but I think when people say that, like, it's not forward thinking and like usability, there's also that issue. But the fact that you can use a microphone and you click it on top and it's an add-on like that, it's so fucking awesome. I don't know, like, it's this weird.
It is.
I'm in this dilemma. So if I had to pick day one console, like, controllers are the worst ones, it's easy to just say the Sega Saturn American pad. But the other ones were perfect almost. Like, the 3-pad is not bad. It has the best D-pad in the era. This one doesn't have the best joystick and the analog stick in the era for Dreamcast. I feel like the GameCube and PS2 did have smoother analogs. The triggers weren't as good as, I don't really like the GameCube controller that much. I know there's people that are nostalgic for it, but it definitely was heavier and it felt more expensive than this one. So I have to give it to the Dreamcast. Sorry. Hey. What about you?
For worst, was that your worst pick, the Dreamcast?
Well, the Sega Saturn number, the big American pad. Then
okay.
Well, SG-1000, the Sega Saturn big American pad than this one, even though the Master System, whatever.
Yeah, I would probably put the SG-1000 one first as worst. Second being that Western revision of the Saturn pad. As far as weirdest, I would say the 3D pad, because there was so many out there decisions being made that people at the time weren't aware were actually forward-thinking Dreamcast plans. Also, I think the controller disconnecting from the wire was just weird to me at the time, because I thought there was some reason for it, and there wasn't. It was some function that was never actually, explored.
Utilized.
And as far as like the best overall, I have to give it to the Japanese Saturn pad, like that original one. It's just, there's a reason why people want USB controllers and wireless versions of that one, because it replaces any video game console controller for them up to like 1996, or 97.
Easy.
Anything that's not 3D, they're like, yeah, I need my Saturn pad. And like I said, here I have mine. Let me see if I can reach it. This one that just recently came out from Retrobit.
Oh, I don't have that one with the joysticks.
It's weird, but it feels really good.
How's the?
And then it just kind of has these.
How do you
in case you need them?
Like, you could use them on a 3D game. I'm assuming on PC, but like
exactly.
Yeah. So it's like if you want to play what's that game called? Penny, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But it's got everything. It's got these. It's got the dual triggers, and it feels really nice. But
there's a reason why Retrobit has like 15 variations of the Dreamcast. The Sega Saturn pad. It's selling that well for them. So yeah, I agree with you. This is the best pad they've released. It's the magnus opus of the 2D era for Sega. This is their basically Mona Lisa.
It is their Mona Lisa. And our Mona Lisa are our Patreon members. So if you are a Patreon supporter at any tier, you can share your memories. We'll read them at the end of the show. And because we're going to be revisiting accessories in 2 episodes, I'll read some of these on that episode. But for this one, we have a memory from Daniel Andres, who talks about controllers. So he said, oh man, what a fun idea for an episode. Let's see. For me, I personally have always and forever will love the Sega Dreamcast controller. I don't give a damn what most people will say about this controller. For all I know, most people may love it as much as I do. I find it to be incredibly unfair for it to be placed or compared against modern controllers, and my heart irks each time I see it placed in a C or D on someone's tier list of controllers. I know it's just people's opinions and everything, but in my opinion, some opinions are just plain wrong.
Dang.
In the wise words of Adam Koralik, it's not a perfect controller, not by far, but it does work incredibly well for the games that it's designed for. And that statement was held true to the test of time. I never had any personal problems with it. I will always love the Dreamcast controller. P.S. I also love the Genesis 6-button arcade stick. I'm a the Big 6 controller and both the 3D control pad and 2D fighter pad for the Saturn. I'm also a big fan of the Model 1 Sega CD. It's so awesome and badass how it lights up and how well it just clicks attached to the Model 1 Genesis. Yeah, I never thought of the Sega CD as an accessory, but it really is. You need the Genesis for it. It's like the most expensive accessory ever. As Mark from Classic Game Room has once said, Optimus Prime is not complete without his trailer. So there we have it.
And I agree. I think
yes.
the Dreamcast pad is not holding you back. I will say it holds one game back. Jet Set Radio. I think the second joystick would have been nice for that game, and like the HD release solidified that for me. So yeah.
And fitting that you would mention Jet Set Radio, because our next episode, you are going to be telling the people about games that were inspired by Jet Set Radio. That includes Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, Hover, and I think there's a few more out there. So yeah, that'll be fun. We can see. I don't know. How are you going to do that episode? Have you figured it out yet?
I'll probably break it down by each game, and then we'll talk a little bit about the influence behind the game and what fans thought when it came out. I'll probably play them too. I haven't played a few of these. I tried to like stay away from these like spiritual successors from other people, because I'm always like gonna look at them the you're not the guys that created this game. You don't know what you're doing. So I'll be more loose and try not to be judgmental and play these games, and we'll have a fun Jet Set Radio inspiration spiritual successor talk next time on Sega Talk. Bye.
The pauses are getting longer.